Welcome back, guys, to the I Love Wrestling podcast. I'm your host, as always, Justin Woolwine, and today, celebrating episode 200 with us, is the king of controversy himself, Austin Aries. How we doing?
Good, Justin. Congratulations on 200 episodes. Great
Thank,
accomplishment.
thank you. It's been just over a year and a half, and we're rocking and rolling. And I kind of dropped the ball with episode 100. I didn't even realize it happened until afterwards. So I figured
Right.
I'd make it special for the fans, give them like a little treat, bringing Double A on here. So I'm
Cool.
excited to have you, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Before we dive into your career, all that fun stuff, you want to shout out socials and things like that, just to let fans know where they could stay up to date with everything Austin Aries?
Yeah, I'm not huge in the social media world, but I'm probably most active on my Instagram account, which is Austin Aries. I do have an X account. I don't really use it much. That's just at Austin Aries. And
Okay,
I do believe you can still find copies of my book Food Fight at my pro wrestling tea store.
nice, nice. Uh, here on the podcast, it's the I Love Wrestling podcast. With that, I try to start in the same general area. To do to be a wrestler, to be a commentator, to be a part of the business, all you got to be a fan. So Aries, when did you find professional wrestling? Was there something about it that made you fall in love with it, or something that maybe grew on you over time?
No, the minute I was about 4 years old, and I grew up in the Midwest, just outside of Milwaukee. And yeah, it was just one fateful Saturday morning. I turned it on, and up to that point, I was really big into GI Joe and military stuff. A lot of my uncles and my grandfathers both served, so I used to have like dummy grenades and dummy bullets and stuff. And so I'd go camp my tent out and have all my GI Joe toys. And then one Saturday morning, I saw AWA wrestling on TV, and yeah, it just captivated me. And from
Ooh,
that point on, all the GI Joe toys went away, and started getting all the old Remco action figures, AWA action figures, and yeah, the rest is history.
who were some of your favorites at the time?
Well, I mean, it wasn't about favorites. It was just like taking it all in, right? Again, I was 4 or 5 years old, so it was just
Yeah,
Jesse Ventura and Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel, and you saw the Road Warriors there for the first time, and um, yeah, pretty crazy. Hulk Hogan, right before he went to WWF.
okay.
Actually, the first live show I ever went to was at the old Mecca Arena in Milwaukee, and it was Hulk Hogan versus Blackjack Lanza and Bobby Heenan in a cage.
That's
And
badass.
yeah, and then growing up, I just really grew up watching the Crockett era wrestling on WTBS. So that to me will always be wrestling. The Four Horsemen and Dusty Rhodes and Sting and the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, the Russians, the Road Warriors. That was my Saturday night 5:05 on the Superstation.
So I have to assume growing up and getting into like even your teenage years, you was probably an NWA, WCW kind of guy and not a WWF guy.
I always gravitated towards wrestling.
Okay.
The quote unquote sports entertainment version of it didn't appeal to me as much. It seemed a little cartoony, and I liked the stuff that felt real and authentic. And so yeah, and I would try to really watch anything that I could find on TV. Back then we had little dials we could turn on the knob, and sometimes I would get like Continental, or I'd get some random obscure Southern promotion. Remember UWF, being the thing for a while. Um, so really, Texas World Class Championship Wrestling, all of a sudden they started airing that on ESPN right after school. So I would dig into whatever I could get, could kind of get my hands on to watch. But yeah, I think I always, when I think of like professional wrestling, I think of wrestling. I don't think of the sports entertainment that WWE now does so well. They do it
Definitely.
very well what they do, but there's just different flavors of ice cream, so to speak.
It's really cool because I grew up through the 2000s and into the 2010s. So like I grew up with WWE, but when my dad and my uncles and my grandfather would show me wrestling, it was always the old NWA stuff
Yeah.
or World Class or AWA. So like
Yeah.
they really taught me, I guess, what wrestling was. So
Yeah.
then like I could go and like I'm like as a kid I enjoyed like the Hardys and things like that. But like I also really got to understand what wrestling actually was. So
Sure.
I think it's really cool that you kind of had I guess obviously you didn't have the Hardys growing up and things like that, but you got to really experience the psychological, methodical portion of professional wrestling before you ultimately come out and show us what you got. Speaking of that, kind of when did that path kind of come like into your vision? Like when did you decide, hey, maybe this can be a thing I can do? Like did you see a training school or a
Yeah. I mean,
tape? Like what happened?
I grew up a baseball player, so my dream was always to be a major league baseball player.
Okay.
My genetics had other thoughts because I stopped growing when I was about 5'8" or so. The scouts aren't drooling over 5'8" pitchers, and so I did go to college for baseball, and then kind of started taking a different path. Spent about 2 years in college. Figured out that really wasn't for me. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I know I didn't want to do what everyone else around me was doing, right? Which was kind of the get your education, get a job, get a wife, have kids, get a house, get a dog. And then a lot of those people that followed that path, at least around where I was, didn't seem really happy with that. You're kind of like stuck in that. And so yeah, I was just trying to figure some stuff out, as a kid, early 20s. And one of my old friends from childhood called me up kind of randomly and told me he was living up in Minneapolis, which was about 2 hours from where I was going to school. And he told me he was trained to be a pro wrestler. And again, that blew my mind because this was pre-internet days, so you couldn't just Google pro wrestling schools, So if you didn't know somebody who knew somebody, you wouldn't have even known how to get into the business. So I took a drive up there to check it out because I'm not going to say I didn't believe him, but I had to see it for myself. And yeah, I walked into this small garage and just outside of Minneapolis, and the ring was set up there, and I had heard of the trainer Eddie Sharkey. Him along with Terry Fox were running the school, and I'd known that Eddie Sharkey had trained guys like the Road Warriors and Rick Rude and Crusher Khrushchev and just a lot of the guys from the Minnesota area. And once I saw that ring, though, I was like, wow, this is actually a thing. And I knew at that moment, like, this is what I want to do. However, I got to figure that out. So I was able to broker a deal with Terry. He's told me, he's like, you can't get in the ring, $3,000. And I was like, man, I got $500 to my name. I'll give you half, and I'll pay every week as much as I can. And he said, let me think about it. And then about 30 minutes later, he came over. He said, this is what you really want to do? I was like, more than anything else in the world, Terry. And he said, okay, you have a deal. And so a week later, I moved up on my buddy's couch. I gave Terry $250. I started giving plasma twice a week to make money. It was, 25 the first time and $35 the second time if you went the same week. So that was $60 a week to give plasma. Started working labor-ready temp jobs at 5 a.m., making $7 an hour, whatever it was, ridiculous. But whatever I had to do to be able to chase the dream, there was no GoFundMe. I didn't come from money. So I had to figure out a way to finance, this chase that I was now on to become a professional wrestler.
Absolutely. So like just out of curiosity, what was your training experience like? Was it something that you hear a lot of times nowadays that maybe training for guys now is a little bit easier than it used to be back in the day? Did you have to deal with a little bit of I don't want to call it hazing, but for lack of better words, like hazing to see if you can make it in the business?
It wasn't really hazing, but the thing that I've noticed is now, I've run schools, I go to a lot of schools now, I do seminars. you know, there was a method of earning each step of the process, meaning
Yeah.
just because we paid some money didn't mean we got to get in the wrestling ring right away. I spent the first 3-4 weeks doing things outside the wrestling ring. So the guys that were more advanced that had been there before me, now they were in the ring doing their things, but now we were outside the ring just on wrestling mats, learning how to lock up, how to grab a headlock, hammer lock, top wrist lock, front face lock, how to do all these holds and counter holds. That was the first focus, right? Before we ever got to get in the ring. Then once we earned our way into the ring, now we really started learning the most basic fundamental things, which is, your few bumps, your face bump, your back bump, your flip bump. And then and then now integrating those holds that we had learned, the lockups and that, into now some of those bumps, fireman's carries, snap mares, right? But the thing is, I get it. When you're new to this, you want to just start running. You want to try all the cool stuff you see on TV. And, I really credit my trainers, Terry and Eddie, with that old school approach. Was I had to do the same 15 things over and over and over and over and over and over every day for months before I got to add the new things to the arsenal. So I really had a great foundation of basics that was laid for me, so that as I started to make my career, I always had that to fall back on. And was it fun? Well, no, because you just want to start doing the fun stuff, but you have to understand that you have to crawl before you can walk. You have to be able to walk before you run. And once you get too far ahead, you don't go back to relearn the basics, right? You think you know it already. And so from the footwork to the feeding to the timing to the execution of just the most basic things, those things had to be perfected. Those had to become muscle memory before we got to learn the fun stuff. And so what I see nowadays is a lot of schools is they just move the kids way too fast through the process because they want them to come back next week to get their next payment,
Yeah.
and so they kind of teach the kids what they want to learn instead of what they need to learn. And some of the stuff in the very beginning it's tedious and it's not the fun stuff, but that's part of the weeding out process where you figure out who really wants this, who just says they want it, who's willing to put the work in, who's willing to do the not so fun stuff to get to the fun stuff.
Definitely. I mean, just looking at your training experience, and then as you've been able to help train the future and do seminars and run training schools, do you find it very important to implement those things that you learned in training into the modern day approach to teaching the next stars?
Yeah, when I ran my classes, when I ran schools, I ran the Ring of Honor school for a while. I ran a school up with Terry back in Minneapolis years later. I taught the way that I was taught because I know it works. It works for me.
Yeah.
It's worked for a lot of other people, that come from that camp. Everyone's going to eventually have to build their house, and they're all going to build their house differently, right? Depending on what skills they have and what they have at their disposal. But we need to lay the same foundation, right? If you don't have a foundation, your house is going to crumble at a certain point. It doesn't matter how nice the chandeliers are, how cool the skylight looks. If you didn't pour the foundation and that's not rock hard and steady, then the house that you build on top of it's going to waver. So, even the guys that I trained in Minneapolis that never had aspirations to go to WWE, but they just wanted to do this, as a side hobby. Some of these guys have been doing it for 20 years now, and they were able to do it for 20 years now because, again, I think that we laid the right foundation to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how to do it the right way, protecting our bodies, but always relying on the basic fundamentals. We can keep getting more creative and more innovative, but I think the very basic foundation and fundamentals of pro wrestling will always be what it is. And so to have those things in your toolbox, I think is paramount to having a successful career.
Absolutely. Another thing that I always like to kind of look back on is if you look at like modern day, just like wrestlers leaving a training school and getting out into the indies and making a name for themselves, it's kind of easier when you look at it from social media. It's very easy to just get connected with whoever. What was it like for you coming out of training to try to break out and get into different promotions and trying to really lay a groundwork for what you'd ultimately end up doing in your career?
Yeah, we didn't have the luxury of social media, so we had to do it. We had to do it the old school way. We had to actually, you know, um, start doing your shows locally. For where you trained out of, and then you know another promoter sees you and says, "Oh, do you want to be on my show?" And then you go do that one. You meet some new people, shake some hands, you work some different people. Then eventually, I had an opportunity to do something out of state down in Iowa. Oh wow, this person's going to book me down in Iowa, and I think it was like a ladder match. I'm sure I did a bunch of dumb stuff I didn't need to do. But you're trying to impress people, so you go do that, and then it was like, hey, now I worked with this guy that was from the Milwaukee area, and he ran his own promotion, and then he put me in touch with the guy. So it was just a very organic kind of process of continue to network. But it was like we had to hop in our car and drive. We couldn't put a video of up on YouTube and go, hey, check out my YouTube channel and see all my wrestling. We had to have VHS tapes, and we'd have to hand the guy a VHS tape, an 8x10, and we knew they're never going to watch it. It was going to go in a pile with all the other VHS tapes and 8x10s. But that was it. And so it was like 4 years of kind of doing that, of starting out as a $10 guy, and then a $20 guy, and then a $30 guy, and then a $50 guy, $75 guy. And you just keep branching out and putting out good performances, be reliable, be professional. Don't no show, live up to your responsibilities and your agreements. And then after 4 years, things started kind of picking up. I went and did a Dr. Tom Pritchard camp along with Sean Davari. We drove, I think, 15, 16 hours. He was the head of WWE talent at the time, talent relations. So to do one of his seminars, to be able to see, be seen by him and get some feedback, that led to some dark matches, some extra work with WWF at the time, which just kind of puts you on the radar. Then the Super 8, which was like one of the biggest independent wrestling tournaments of the year, where they would grab guys, the best guys from all the different areas that maybe hadn't been discovered yet, and they'd have the Super 8 tournament. And so that was, again, like these things all kind of happen within a few months of each other, kind of put me more in a national scene. And then Ring of Honor, had an opportunity for me to come in and do a do or die match. And again, I facilitated that. I hopped in a van full of guys and drove out to the East Coast and had my do or die match. And they liked what they saw, and they were interested in using me on a more full-time basis. So I made it easy for them and said, hey, I'll move to Philadelphia. And so I relocated out to Philadelphia in 2004. Then obviously the big break was being the guy to beat Samoa Joe for the Ring of Honor title. And that kind of put me in the national scene, and you're off and running.
So, I mean, you brought up a couple moments there, whether it was beating Joe, whether it was getting your foot in the door at Ring of Honor, Super 8, WWE kind of extra work, tryout. What do you think was your first break, if you had to pinpoint one?
The thing is all those things kind of happened simultaneously, right? It was like, and this is kind of the thing about success. Or opportunity. You can be grinding away, and you feel like you're making these small little incremental jumps, but nothing major. And then all of a sudden, because of all the work you've been putting in, all of a sudden doors start to open up, opportunities start to happen. And so that it all kind of came at the same time. It was like the Super 8 was visible, to a national scene. Doing the Dr. Tom Pritchard camps opened up the extra work for WWE. So now they knew about me. They also followed the Super 8. Now Ring of Honor was a thing. I knew people that were working there. I got an opportunity there. It all kind of happened at once. The biggest break obviously was being the guy to beat Samoa Joe for the title, right? That could have been any number of guys in our company, because we had, tons of talented, wrestlers. If you look at all the names that came out of that era, it could have been anybody. And, they chose me to be the guy and so that immediately put me under a spotlight, and that was the biggest break for me up until that point in my career by far.
Absolutely. So I mean, if we're looking at like mid 2000s Ring of Honor, the roster stacked. It's yourself with Brian Danielson, Joe's there, the Briscos, and I'm sure I'm leaving out some names, but the roster stacked. The matches are great. Storylines are excellent. But what do you really think made that era of Ring of Honor so beloved amongst wrestling fans, both back then and then even like as we look back now?
We filled a void, right? When WWE bought their competition, and now there was no longer, we had always had competition. There was always, two major companies, sometimes three, and that all went away. And so there was a void to fill. Now at that same time, the internet starts becoming a thing,
Yeah.
and things like tape trading, right? Like people now are starting to be able to connect with people from all over the world who are into the same types of things they were into. You didn't have that access. You didn't have that direct, connection to people. So if you're in Chicago and all of a sudden you're talking to somebody who lives in New Mexico and you guys both follow New Japan Pro Wrestling, oh my God, that's so cool. Did you see this match? And now there's this tape trading. So it was kind of this perfect storm. And then you have this new batch of young, hungry, upstart pro wrestlers who have the influence of the WCW cruiserweight division, of the New Japan, super juniors, right? Like, and we're starting to bring that style over to the US, which a lot of the US fans hadn't seen because they'd only really seen WWE style, right? And so you have all these things happening, and then all of a sudden TNA pops up, and they're starting this X division thing. So I just think that like the fans that were what we can now call the internet wrestling community, like that was their birth, right? As the internet became a thing, and now they had this promotion in Ring of Honor that literally was being driven by the message boards, their opinions, they're buying the VHS tapes, they're buying the DVDs, they're supporting it, and they feel like this is our thing, this is ours, it's an extension of us. It was very much, if we look back now, I say that Ring of Honor basically kind of followed in the footsteps of what ECW was, where you had a very strong fan base that felt like they embraced it because it was like, this is for us, this is ours, and I think, and then, I really think that's what it was. And obviously there was a lot of talent and a lot of great matches that people were hungry for, and so the energy of those crowds. I'm sure eventually some company will come along that will be able to duplicate that or replicate that. But man, if you go back and look now, it's like, whether we knew it or not at the time, we were really in the middle of something really special during that era.
Yeah, at that like kind of that mid 2000s era, you brought up TNA, which was also at a crazy uprise when we really look back at it. As a talent who kind of went back and forth, along with others that went back and forth from Ring of Honor and TNA. Did you think like at the time that going back and forth and getting that exposure from both companies would help elevate you the way it did, or was it just kind of by chance, circumstance happened, I go here and then I go back over here? Like how did that work for you, and did you really pay attention to it, or was it just organic?
I mean, I think, at the time you're, as a performer, you're always looking for, the best stages, that you can perform on, and
Yeah.
so outside of WWE, there wasn't a lot of main stages, and so there really was Ring of Honor. Then TNA became one, or if it wasn't those two, then you're probably looking to do something, in Japan or Mexico or something like that. So there wasn't a ton of places that had great visibility that you could also get a good payday in, and that could help you stay relevant in this scene. So, and I think the other part was I was starting to learn about the backstage politics and the political process of pro wrestling, which I really hadn't had to deal with too much. But then, like when TNA became its thing, and then there was kind of this, you know, competition between Ring of Honor and TNA, and who was bigger, and who was the two, and who was the three, and
Yeah.
you know that became a big, a big dick waving contest, and some of the talent kind of got caught up in that, you know, and I was one of those that kind of got caught up in that process of I was really loyal to Ring of Honor. Then TNA's bringing me in on a per show deal. And now they're saying, oh, you know, we want you to fly down here tonight for our show because there's a storm coming. And I'm like, but I have a Ring of Honor show tonight. And they said, don't worry. We called them and told them you wouldn't be there. Like, wait, how does that work? I'm an independent contractor. How's my part-time job? Call my full-time job and tell them I'm not coming to work tonight. You know,
That's
and
kind
so
of
you're
crazy.
trying to, you know, trying to learn all these things. So, you know, a lot of it was just trial by fire. You know, you're learning on the fly. I didn't have a lot of mentors or people that had, you know, in my locker rooms that could kind of help me figure out how to navigate that part of the industry, you know, gracefully.
So, I mean, looking at your first stint in TNA, it was a very interesting time for you. You come in as Austin Aries, and then you kind of get roped in with Kevin Nash, which I have to assume is an interesting time. What went into to coming alongside with Nash and becoming Austin Star?
Well, again, so going back to the story I just told you, you know, TNA wanted me to fly down to Orlando on a Saturday, um, while I was en route to a Ring of Honor show. And I'd done a Friday Ring of Honor show to double shot Friday, Saturday. Sunday
Mhm.
was a TNA pay per view. So they called me Saturday afternoon and said, hey, we want you to fly down to Orlando tonight. And I said, well, I can't do that. I've got a Ring of Honor show. And they said, well, don't worry. We called them and told them you wouldn't be there. So obviously that didn't make me happy. So I called Ring of Honor and I asked what was going on. And, you know, Gabe was kind of flipping out because he just had 7 talent that was pulled from his show the afternoon of the show. And so, you know, I told him not to, you know, that I'd be there. It's not how I do business. I'll see you in 2 hours. I called TNA back and said, I'm not no showing this Ring of Honor show. This, you know, this is a place that's paying my bills right now. And it's just not how I do business. And if roles reversed, I wouldn't no show your show either. I'm going to stay. I'm going to do this show tonight, and I'll find my way down to Orlando by hook or crook. If I got to, you know, if I got to drive, if I got to hitchhike, I'll be down there tomorrow for your pay per view. And so I was one of Roderick Strong also stuck back with me because we were a tag team at the time. All the other talents went down to the TNA, and yeah. So the next day, I sat through cancellations and delays, and at the airport, and it was, you know, dug myself out of a bunch of snow, and you know, eventually we got down there. We got down there about 4 p.m. Call time was noon. Pay per view didn't start till 6:30. So in my mind, I did exactly what I said I was going to do. I didn't screw anybody over. I didn't no show any events. I did Ring of Honor. I made my way down there. I was there in plenty of time to do my match at the pay per view, and I felt really good about that. I thought that showed professionalism. And the next day, I was pulled aside by TNA and being told I was being suspended for being late. And so here I thought I did the right thing, and they were upset because I didn't
It was a
abide by
couple
their.
hours late.
Well, no, what it was again, this was the dick waving contest. This
Yeah.
was we're more important than that place, and we're going to show you that when we tell you to do something, you do it,
Yeah.
right? And so they suspended me for being late, which just basically means they didn't book me for a couple of months. So at this time, now that they actually came with a proper contract, because I was just under a per show agreement, so they
Mhm.
actually came with a long term deal for me. But in that deal, they wanted to own the name Austin Aries. And after just having dealt with how that they treat people, having be suspended for not no showing events, I didn't feel like it was in my best interest, or I trusted them enough to hand over my name. So that's when I pitched the idea of coming in as Austin Starr and said that they could trademark and they could own that name and that character, because I didn't feel like they were taking me very seriously. Right? They, the way they were treating me, what they were offering me pay wise, they weren't looking at me as a cornerstone guy. I was just another one of the X Division guys, which at that time, for as much as the X Division helped TNA stand out, they always looked at the X Division guys as lower tier guys, right? And that's how it's always been in the wrestling industry. If you're not one of the heavyweights, you're considered to be less than. And so, yeah, I just pitched the idea of Austin Starr. You don't want to take me seriously. You don't want to pay me what I'm worth. Then you can own this name and you can own this character, and that way you're not going to devalue Austin Aries.
Did you enjoy your time working along with Kevin Nash?
We had a lot of fun doing all that Paparazzi Production stuff, mainly because it was just us. It was Jeremy Borash with a camera and us. We didn't have a script. We didn't have writers. We would stay after the show on our own time, and we would just come up with this stuff and film it. And it was a lot of fun. Kevin's a great guy. He was obviously willing to work with us to help, give us a bit of a rub, right? A lot of us didn't have much character development. They didn't, the viewers didn't really know who we were as characters. Yeah, we could do some great wrestling stuff, but there was nothing to really sink your teeth into from a character development standpoint. So, doing that with Kevin, and yeah, I mean, you can go back and watch it. It was just ridiculous in all the right ways, and just a lot of fun for sure.
And looking at it, before I even did this, I went back and just watched some of that stuff because I forgot that it was something that even took place. And you can honestly tell, even for Nash, it just looks like he's having the time of his life, just goofing off and having a good time, which I think that's the best part of wrestling, when you get to just, not everything has to be serious. Not everything has to be overly storyline driven, but you guys were just having a great time, having a laugh. And I think that's what made that part of your career and even his career so special.
Yeah, I think sometimes, we've got to this point with wrestling where we over rely on writers and booking teams, and we take that creativity out of the talent's hand, and by and large, a lot of us talent, we're not just talented in the ring, but we have some talent creatively as well. And it's sometimes the best thing to do is just get out of the talent's way and let them drive the bus.
Absolutely. What led to you going back to Ring of Honor?
Another disagreement in how we do business. The company at the beginning of the new year, after I returned, informed the X Division guys that they were no longer going to pay for our hotel rooms, for our transportation from the airport to the venue, which again was something that had always been handled that way, and I never had thought to make sure it explicitly said it in the contract. So once contracts were signed, then they decided to take those things away. So fast forward to April, now I'm paying my hotel, I'm paying my food, I'm paying my transportation, once I get to Orlando. And we had a Sunday pay-per-view called Lockdown in St. Louis. And then Monday, we had a travel day for everyone to get down to Orlando. And then Tuesday and Wednesday was going to be TV tapings. So basically, long story short, they had asked me to come in on Monday, and I already had made some plans. It was my birthday weekend. I'd cashed in some favors to get a timeshare, because a lot of the X Division guys, we'd cram 3-4 in a room to save money now. So I got a nice place that had 8 beds, and there was a pool and basketball hoop, and it was an off day, and it was my birthday. So I was like, hey, we're gonna get some food, we'll grill out, we'll have a nice off day before TVs. And they decided they wanted me to come in and film something along with Alex Shelley and Bob Backlund on the Monday. And so I just asked questions. I just asked how long it was going to take. I asked if there was a reason why we had to do this on Monday instead of Tuesday or Wednesday, when I'll be there for 12 hours. And then the big no-no is I asked if I was going to be compensated for coming into work on a day that I was I'm paying all my bills today. I'm paying my food, I'm paying my hotel, I'm paying my travel. And now you're asking me to come in and work on a day that was a scheduled travel day. And so I just asked those questions, and they did not respond kindly to me asking questions. They hung up on me. Then they told me to go send me home, and then when I got back, I was now suspended again for a bad attitude. Um, and the funny thing was, they never actually filmed anything that day because Bob Backlund was smart and he never answered his phone, right? And so they never got to film the stuff that day. They made the guys come in super early on Tuesday morning to do it. Again, this is just comes down to, you know, my issues by and large, you know, have always been, it's never been about creative or wins and losses or anything like that. It always comes down to like how we treat people. Are we trying to take advantage of people? You know, are we chewing them up and spitting them out? Do we really care about them? Are we honest with them? Are we deceptive? And I don't mix well with those things. I don't mix well with dishonesty or deception or being taken advantage of. Doesn't work for me in the wrestling world or in the real world. And so here they suspended me the second time in probably a year and a half. You know, so the first time I get suspended because I won't no show another company's show. Now I get suspended because I had the audacity to ask if I was going to get paid to come work a day that I wasn't scheduled to work when I'm paying all my expenses. So at that point, I just no longer felt like TNA was going to be a place where I could be my best. And so there was actually a negotiated buyout, and they basically, and I was not supposed to know this, but I got the heads up. They basically traded me or sold me or let Ring of Honor buy me out of my contract. And that led to me going back to Ring of Honor.
Okay. This second run for you in Ring of Honor, I thought was really cool. For one, I'm a huge fan of the Briscos, and that's kind of when we get to see you guys really interact. Looking back, how do you feel about your time working alongside or against Jay and Mark?
I love those guys. You know, they're super talented. You know, one thing I think that really what sets wrestlers apart beyond what they do in the ring is authenticity. And there's probably not a more authentic duo or two guys you'll ever meet than Mark and Jay was. So that just resonated. People connected with that. Even if you didn't connect with them because you were like them, you knew somebody like them. And so there was those guys weren't acting. And then when you get in the ring, these guys just had a drive and an intensity and a passion for this that very few people could match. So loved everything I've always done with those guys, whether it was teaming with them or against them.
Not too long ago, I had Jimmy Jacobs on here, and we kind of talked about the Briscoes, specifically Mark, and how, like, if we look at today and what he's doing in AEW, how do you feel like about Mark finally kind of getting that big spotlight that maybe him and his brother earned over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's kind of a mixed emotion, right? Because we know that one of the reasons he's getting this singles run is because Jay passed, and I'm sure if you asked Mark, he'd much rather that they were doing this as a tag team right now. But you play the hand that's dealt, and thing was, and that's what made him such a great tag team, is because both of those guys could stand on their own. They didn't need their brother next to them. They both could stand on their own. They both had enough of a unique personality, when you separated them, and that's what just made them so great together. And so, yeah, I love Mark, and I'm super happy that he's continued on and that he's getting his flowers, so to speak, and he's still doing it at a high level, and he's still authentic and as he's ever been, and still good in the ring.
Absolutely. I kind of skipped on this when we was talking about your first run with Ring of Honor. I believe that was whenever you um, took part in helping train some of the guys and was a trainer. Um, how did that come to fruition? I was really interested in that. I'm sorry I skipped over it.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I it's in my memory, if I have good memory. So if my memory serves me correctly, I think CM Punk was running the school, and then he
Okay.
went off. He went off and was signed by WWF. Um, so they needed a new head trainer. I lived in the area. Again, I lived 15, 20 minutes from the school. I was open to doing it. And that was it. And so I ran, I think I only did it for about a year or so. A couple of my guys, Rhett Titus, still going strong. Grizzly Redwood, love that guy. Um, Ernie Osiris, he runs his own promotion now up in the Northeast. So those are the guys, some of the guys from my class. Um, but yeah, listen, in retrospect, um, I was probably still too green. I was
Okay.
probably still too new myself to really be a really super effective trainer. Obviously, at the time, you don't think that because you think you know what you know. But again, that's why I just always relied on the basics. I just taught the basic fundamentals. I wasn't trying to teach people how to wrestle like Austin Aries. I was just teaching them the things that I learned that helped me build my career. And so for a lot of those guys, they were able to go out and, Rhett now 20 years, he's built his own career. Um, and yeah, super proud of those guys. Yeah, for sure.
We've also mentioned like a couple times in this, you've moved throughout the country. You started in just outside Milwaukee, you go to Minnesota, you move to Pittsburgh. Um, what is that like trying to move from place to place to follow your career and
Yeah.
to capitalize off these moments?
Yeah, I think last count I've moved like 38 times or something since I left college. Yeah. And this is one thing I tell people now, I've had the luxury of I'm not married, I don't have kids, I don't have pets. I've curated a life that's allowed me to chase the opportunities that were out there instead of waiting for them to come to me. And again, when Ring of Honor said, "Hey, we're interested in using you," I'll move to Philadelphia. So I went to Baltimore for 6 months. I lived with my cousin to transition to the East Coast, and then got my own spot and lived in Philly for a number of years. When TNA, when I was working for TNA and we were doing all of our filming down here in Orlando, I moved down to Florida, make it easy. Um, you know, I tell guys, if you really are serious about this, make yourself accessible. Make it easy for a promoter to book you. With Ring of Honor, like they wanted to book me, but if I was still living in Minnesota or Wisconsin, then I might be on less shows because now we're talking about a flight, we're talking about a hotel room. They were running mostly in the Northeast. Well, now if I move to the Northeast, they can put me on all the shows and I'm cheaper. And so they can actually pay me more because less money is going to the airline, right? Right. So it's just make yourself a commodity. And sometimes it's just about being available, being local, not being a fly-in. The difference between having to fly a talent in or not can be $300, $400, $500.
Yeah.
And so, now having been a guy who's run shows and now, so you see the business side, you see the talent side, and a lot of times it's just dollars and cents. So I've always had a life where if I needed to pack up and I needed to move, that's what I would do. And I've enjoyed living all sorts of different places in this country. I've lived places out, I've lived abroad. I lived in Mexico for a year and a half. I've spent time in India and Spain, and I like diving into other cultures as well. I like to travel and just see all of the world. And that's the greatest thing pro wrestling's done for me. It's let me travel the world a lot of times on somebody else's dime.
Is there anywhere in the world that you have yet to see that you'd like to see?
Oh man, yeah, I'm tons of places probably. I haven't spent like here's a weird one like Russia. Like I would find interesting, right? Like
Yeah.
some of these places, like I recently, well not recently, a few years back, I got to go to Saudi Arabia and wrestle over there, right? What a unique culture, and so a lot of times you got to understand is we get everything through the U.S. media filter of how
Mm-hmm.
how they tell us here how things are other places. And I've traveled now, and I'm old enough to know that that's not actually the full truth, or it's not reality. It's just a version of it that they want you to believe. So I like to experience things for myself, So yeah, like I haven't been to Thailand, like everyone tells me I need to go to like Chiang Mai, and like there's, Belize and, some other places in South America I haven't been to yet. And some of the countries in Europe, some of these landlocked countries you don't always think about, to visit. And then there's places I've just kind of been for a wrestling show, but haven't got to like really stay for a couple of weeks and really experience, like, Austria or Switzerland or Sweden or things like this. And weirdly, I've never been to Alaska. You're right here in the yeah. So like, I get to Alaska. Like I don't like the cold, but I'll certainly go there in the summer.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, just speaking of wrestling, is there you mentioned all these places that you'd like to go? Is there anywhere like that really like has a big wrestling culture that you haven't got to try out yet?
I mean, I'm sure there is. I wouldn't know offhand. I mean, I feel like I've checked almost all the boxes now. Recently, going down to Mexico and wrestling for CMLL. I mean that checked a big one off the list. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the UK. I've spent time in Japan. I've spent time in Australia. They all have their own like passionate fan bases, and yeah, it's I've been very blessed to be able to travel and wrestle all sorts of cool places.
Definitely. Another like really cool thing that if you look back at history that you've been able to do is you were the first 2-time Ring of Honor World Champion.
Right.
What does that mean to you, holding that piece of history in Ring of Honor?
Well, I mean, at the time, obviously, again, it's just, whenever a company is willing to put you in position to be the top guy, you have, you're grateful for that, but you also know it comes with responsibility. And so, I wanted those challenges, and the thing is about records or things is like, they're going to be broken at some point. Someone's going to become the first 3-time champion, and then now your feat isn't as impressive. But at the time, Ring of Honor was still such a new entity. I think the coolest thing about it was my 2 reigns were completely different. The character I was and the wrestler I was in 2004, 2005 during my first reign was way different than my second reign when I brought the greatest man that ever lived. I brought that character into the fold and was a completely different character than the previous version of Austin Aries.
Do you have a favorite of the 2 reigns?
No. I mean, what I really enjoy about this industry and what I've been able to do with myself personally is have range. And so I can be a little over the top as a character when I need to be, and that's fun. But when it's time to get serious and go out there and put the work boots on and show people and remind people that at the end of the day, I'm still one of the very best when the bell rings in between those ropes. And, a lot of guys can do one or the other, but they might not be able to do both at a high level. And I like to think that I can do both at a high level. I can be a character, but I can also just be a good old pro wrestler too.
When did you realize in your career that being able to pivot and improvise and reinvent yourself was going to be critical into maintaining success in the wrestling industry?
Oh, once you see guys like AJ Styles or Bryan Danielson, and you go, oh, okay. Because for me, early in my career, I was the super athletic guy that could do really cool athletic things in the ring, and that's how I stood out. And then I see this guy named AJ Styles, and I go, oh man, that guy's at a whole nother level, right? So I'm not going to be able to outdo AJ Styles at what he does the best. Again, a guy like Bryan Danielson, right? Like just pound for pound, probably one of the greatest, of our generation. What can I do to stand out when I'm trying to compete for attention against guys like that are so good at what they do? So that's where it's like, okay, I need to have more depth I need to have more depth to my game. I'll always be a good wrestler, but that only is worth so much. Now let me start putting the other components. Let me work on my promos. Let me work on my character. Let me work on my psychology so that now I can compete with these guys who are just so good, at what they did.
I mean, just speaking of AJ Styles, you got to ask, since his retirement just took place as we record this Saturday, how did you feel, if you was able to watch it, about AJ's kind of last chapter for WWE? We'd have to assume, and about his career overall.
I didn't get to see it. It can be cliche, but the guy had a phenomenal career. I mean, he's a one-on-one. He
Yes,
really is, and he did it. He did it the hardest way possible. The hardest dollar to earn in this industry is being a good wrestler.
mm-hmm.
It really is. Like making your money just on just being an exceptional wrestler is very difficult, right? And again, we can start talking about the guys on this hand who made a lot of money and really made it to the very top just being a very good wrestler. And there's maybe, okay, Eddie Guerrero, but Eddie Guerrero could do so much more than that, right? You know, AJ Styles, Bryan Danielson, and then who?
Austin
Now,
Aries.
yeah, to a point. But then
Yeah,
over here, you got guys like Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, right? How many guys made money because they were larger than life characters?
yeah,
So AJ carved his way the hardest way possible just by being phenomenal and exceptional in that ring. And that's not easy to do. And the fact that he did it for as long as he did it at the high level that he did it, it's amazing, amazing. And so all the respect to him. And if this is truly his retirement, then I hope, he's certainly earned it, and I'm sure he's going to enjoy it. But it's pro wrestling, so I'm always skeptical. I always feel like whenever they say it's the last chapter, there's always one more chapter to be written. So
definitely.
you never know.
It's funny you say that. Just, I mean, watching it, kind of spoiler alert. At the end of the match, he takes the gloves off, acts like he's gonna put him in the ring, and then he picks him back up.
Right.
So we'd have to assume maybe he's not done. If for some reason he's not done, would you like to see Austin Aries versus AJ Styles one more time?
I mean, I would never pass that matchup. That's a great matchup. We've only done it a handful of times at best, and certainly we've grown as performers since the last time we've been in the ring. But at the end of the day, it's not about what I want to see; it's about what the fans want to see. So if the fans want to see it, then I'd be happy to do it, But the other thing too is, you talked about the glove thing, and I did read that. Smart pro wrestlers know how to work the fans, because you do what you take what they think they know, and you use it against them.
Absolutely.
I've been doing that for a while, right? And that's why a lot of things that I've done in my career and character, people think are real. Again, used Bound for Glory with John Morrison. People to this day still swear. There's still people who say, "Nope, that was a shoot. He went into business for himself. That wasn't supposed to happen." And that's just you take what people think they know. You take what we know what should happen, and then you give them something different, and then you got them hooked. And so AJ, just by taking those gloves back, he hooked everybody now. Now everyone's hooked, whether he comes back or not. Everyone's
waiting on it.
And that was, whether that was intentional or not, I think it was genius.
Absolutely. We talked earlier about your first trip to TNA, where you would become Austin Starr. Your second tenure, you get to be Austin Aries. Was that something like going in that you wanted, I've made my name for myself as Aries. I want to come in as Aries and show TNA what it was that I have to offer? Or was it their idea for you to come in as yourself and show them what you have to offer?
I don't, there was never even really a discussion of it. Like there was no, okay. I think Austin Starr got dead and buried pretty quick. Once I left there, I think it was like, there was no value in that character anyway.
Gotcha.
No, I just, listen, they had an exhibition showcase. They were interested, want to know if I was interested to come in for one match. Went down for one match. Cleared the air a little bit with a couple people that I felt was prudent to do so. And that one match led to a second match, and then that was for the 4-way for the winner gets the title. And
Mhm.
during the day, I wasn't scheduled to be the guy to win. And then they asked us to all cut promos in the back. And after I ended up cutting my promo, they came in the ring and said they had made a change and that I was now going to be the guy to go over and get the contract. And yeah, and so that was kind of my new lifeline. And I think when I came back that, I guess, third time, I just had a little different mindset. I was a little more comfortable and confident in who I was. I'd established that a little more, in their eyes. And I put my best foot forward. I showed up, presenting myself as a champion, meaning when I showed up to work every day, I had a blazer on, I had nice slacks. I always tell people in seminars, like, dress to where you want to be, not to where you are. If you want to be the world champion, then dress like you're the world champion. Don't wait until you're the world champion to start dressing like it. And I think those things all paid off. And, within 6 months of me coming back there, 8 months, I was the world champion.
Definitely. You came back during the Hogan regime, I believe, if I'm correct. What was your time like working with Hogan, or being at least in the same vortex as Hogan?
Yeah, I mean, I got really lucky with that. And, funny thing is we didn't live too far from each other in Clearwater. I lived in the Clearwater at the time. So we were probably about 10 minutes away, and so I actually ended up, I'd go to hotels sometimes and hang out and just try to soak up as much knowledge as I could. I was obviously being kind of groomed and pushed for that world title victory. So when you start working up higher up on the card, then you start dealing with more of the power players, and Hulk obviously was one of them, and as was Eric. And I always got along with those guys. I think Eric understands me, and so we always had good communication because he gets how I operate. And I just want clear communication, and I don't like bullshit. And this industry, unfortunately, a lot of times is full of bullshit. And a lot of smoke blowing up the ass, and a lot of shaking the hands and putting the knives in the back.
Pretty much.
So the nice thing is in dealing with those guys, I felt like, oh, okay, like they certainly didn't need to, but they treated me like a colleague that was at their level. Where a lot of times previously when I had been in TNA, I was always talked down to like I was just some young X Division kid who didn't know any better. And so that was, I learned a lot. You're learning from the man who did everything, in this business and just in this culture. And I remember thinking to myself, driving over to his house for the first time, like how difficult it must be to be Hulk Hogan, to be able to trust people with your friendship, because everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something from you, and how guarded you must have to be at that status of celebrity and fame and wealth, to where you can never really fully trust people's intentions. So it was just really important for me that when I was, invited into his space, that he knew like I wasn't there to try to take anything from him. And I was happy to, anything he had to share knowledge wise, I was grateful for, but I didn't have an angle. I didn't have, ulterior motives, when I walked in his door.
It's crazy, Brandon. I've never thought about that pressure that Hogan probably felt throughout his career, or I mean, even that probably a lot of you guys feel for being in that spotlight, having to present yourself a certain way, having to knowing eyes are always on you. Just as somebody who's had to deal with it, how how do you best handle situations when people are just all up in your business when maybe you wanna have some space?
Yeah, it's not even that, right? On top of that, and I've had a very small little sliver of fame, and fortune, right? Like compared to a lot of people, right? I always say like I'm the perfect for me, I'm the perfect amount of famous, meaning I can go through my day-to-day life and not be harassed or bothered. But just every once in a while, once or twice a month, somebody will, oh my God, it's Austin Aries. So it's just enough to give the ego a little stroke, or just enough when I'm walking with my dad that somebody comes up and it makes him happy for the day that his son is, recognized. But I don't have to worry about going to the store when I go to the gym or go to the beach. Like I can just be a normal dude, and like I love that. But even for me, when you start to, you're on television and now there's this perception that you're making a lot of money, you're famous, you're on TV, even just like trying to date, just, like the what is the authenticity of women, and because I've seen it firsthand. My cousin played in the NFL, and I remember going out with the Baltimore Ravens at the bar one night and listening to these women, because they didn't know I was with the group, because I don't look like a football player, obviously. I was listening to these conversations, and like these chicks knew every guy, his position, his contract. Like these guys had targets on them.
Crazy.
And so you start to learn, like, I'm a very, what you see is what you get. I'm very authentic. I'm very real. Um, and you start realizing like a lot of the world's not like that. A lot of people are scheming. They have ulterior motives. And when you have something or perceive to have something that they want, you're a target for it. And I've had to learn the hard way. I've trusted some of the wrong people. I've had people take advantage of my kindness. People who I thought were my friends who weren't my friends. I was just a means to an end. And that's just life, man. And you just you learn as you go. But yeah, even for me at that level, I started thinking like, man, what's it got to be like to be someone at Hulk's level where you can't go anywhere? Every person you meet wants something from you. Everyone's got their hand out. Everyone thinks you can, help them. You don't have any privacy. And like, honestly, like, I'm glad I never got to that level. I don't think I could deal with it. I don't think I have the temperament for that.
You know, I've it's something like, as the podcast for me's grown, it's something I've thought about, because you see some podcasters really blow up. Like you look at Chris Van Vliet or Conrad Thompson, like they go places, they get recognized. And that's always something I've really thought of. It's just like, do I really want to be that noticed? Would I like it to pay the bills? Yeah, but do I want to walk down the street and somebody be like, hey, that's that podcast guy? I don't
Yeah.
know, man. It's a lot of pressure.
It's the weird thing too, is like fans, a lot of times they don't, at a certain point, they stop seeing you as a human being.
Yes.
And they just only see you as a celebrity. And then they have this level of, um, where they think like I owe them, right? Like because I'm like, oh, like, well, this is part of your job. It's like, yeah, but when I'm at the beach, I'm not being paid to stop and take pictures with you or to have a 30-minute chat. That's when I go doing signings and I do meet and greets. Then I'm working, but if I'm out shopping, I don't want, like I might not feel like I want to be harassed, or I might not want to take a picture. And so, I always try to remind fans like, hey, your best bet when you meet someone is to just try to treat them like a human being, which means don't tell them, hey, let's take a picture. Ask the right way, like use please and thank you. Like I don't owe anyone anything, right? When I'm working, I'm being paid to do a job. I love my fans. I appreciate my fans, but sometimes there's this entitlement that comes along with it, because they forget, hey, we're just human beings too. We're just human beings. I just happen to do a cool thing for my job for a while, but I'm just a pretty normal guy myself, and I just like to be treated like that.
It's interesting you say that, because that's, I mean, one of the like reasons when I, like, at first when I started the podcast, I don't really feel like I had a lot of direction. I was just kind of doing it. But like after a while, getting to realize that you guys have stories and you have history, and like I don't really ever think I had that opinion that you guys wasn't like normal, but like as a kid, obviously we think superhero, larger than life. But doing this, I've really been able to, I guess, capture the human element of you guys and be able to just let people know, um, but you guys live ordinary lives. Like, you go to the store, you go to the gym, you, like you say, you go to the beach, you have fun, you have a day off. And like, I think it's really important that as fans we get to see that side of you guys, because I for me at least, I appreciate what you guys do even more, because not only do you live a normal life, but then it's kind of like you're Batman at night, and you put the mask on, you get to go out
Sure.
there and do your thing. So
Yeah,
I just have ultimate respect for you.
appreciate that. And I'll even add to that. Like we still have problems.
Yes.
We still have things we go through emotionally or physically. Like money doesn't make all your stresses go away. Money doesn't stop your loved ones from dying, your pets from dying. Like these things happen, and so you know, I've been doing this now for this is my 26th year, and I know that online there can be this perception that Austin Aries is he's hard to work with, or you know I know Jim Cornette's come out on his podcast. No, he was just miserable. He was a miserable guy, and it's like, well, Jim, at that point in my life, like I had a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, not wrestling related, that was really affecting me, and I was in a bad place. You would have never known that because you never took the time to ask me, right? And so, think about if you're a normal person, think about the 5 worst days you've had in your life, and then you've had to go to work and work through those days because you couldn't take off. Well, hey, guess what? That happens to us too. I've had some really dark days and difficult moments. I still had to go to work. And was I at my best that day? Was I smiling and happy? No, I just had to go to work and get through some difficult things. That affects us too. That's not just for normal people. You can be on TV and be famous and still be suffering from depression or anxiety or whatever it might be. Like these things don't like skip over people because they become famous and all of a sudden, oh, now this guy doesn't have any problems. And so I think a lot of times online, fans online, like they don't have the same grace for celebrities that they would have for their friends going through something similar, because they don't think in their mind like, well, that wouldn't affect them. Like if I was that person, I'd never be in a bad mood. It's like, yeah, life is life, man. And sometimes it's difficult.
Definitely, definitely. Just to pivot a little bit, I'm curious on something really cool in TNA that you were a part of and may have helped create. I'm not sure, but we'll get there. Is Option C,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think utilizing that X Division Championship to be able to cash in, kind of to get a world title shot, was a really cool way to show the workhorses getting an opportunity at the big belt. Um, at the time, did you realize that you guys were changing like TNA history? And whose idea was the concept of Option C?
I mean, well, it was legitimately my idea. Like I pitched it to him.
Badass.
I didn't think it was going to be something that, I mean, to this day, people like still come up and talk about it, which is amazing. At the time they said, hey, we got this storyline, we're going to push you to take on Bobby, but you're going to have to relinquish the X Division title. And, my thought was, well, man, like, what does that say about the X Division title if you're just willing to just like, toss it aside to get a shot to real? It's like, it kind of demeans the X Division title. So I was just trying to think of something to where it would just keep a little bit of luster. It wouldn't feel like I was just tossing it aside. And so I had the idea, and my original idea was, hey, it would be cool if every year, whoever the champion is at Destination X, whoever the champion is, like the lead up to Destination X, gets the opportunity to do the same thing I did. So that way, in my mind, like now Destination X becomes this really cool pay-per-view that's unique. And then also the 2 months lead up to Destination X on TV, now the X Division title really gets a spotlight on it, because now more than ever, of course, you always want to be the champion, but if you can be the champion the month before Destination X, you punched your ticket, right? To have to shot at the world title. And so I thought like every year it would give them a really unique storyline and pay-per-view that would really highlight the X Division. in and of itself. And so that was just kind of where my thought was on it. So when they showed me the promo and they said, well, it's option A or B, I said, well, what if I just come up with an option C and it's this? And they're like, oh, we like that. I'm like, let's do it.
That's badass. Just speaking of Bobby Roode, that was a really special night, a special moment. I feel like for both of your careers, Bobby being able to kind of pass you along the title, you being able to become the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. How special was that night for you?
Really special for a couple of reasons. A, you touched on something. What Bobby was able to do with his run, and it wasn't like he wasn't like a guy that had been positioned at the top,
No.
for years. Like this was his first time of really being the man, and damned if he didn't take that and really make it something special. So that when it was time to pass the torch, like it felt like a big deal, and that was all credit to him and how he made himself feel as the world champion in his run. For me, it was special, kind of going back to some of my previous tenures with TNA and some of the issues and struggles I had, to be able to come back as Austin Aries and to be able to organically, through my hard work, my connection with the fans, to create this opportunity in this moment that TNA had no choice but to see through. I give them credit for that. They saw what was happening, they felt what was happening, and they ran with it. They pulled the trigger. But for me, it was satisfying because I felt like all those years that I bet on myself, or I had a difference of opinion of, how valuable I was within the company. In some ways, it felt like a validation to say, yeah, like you were right, and now you finally have achieved the thing that you always saw you could achieve if the company believed in you.
Definitely. You won the TNA World Title during the Impact Wrestling days, just the beginning of them. But what was your thoughts when TNA came back and dropped Impact Wrestling and became TNA Wrestling again?
I mean, it was always just they always kind of had a bit of an identity crisis. It was TNA, then it was Impact. It was Impact. So it was like, well, is it Impact? Is it TNA? Listen, TNA has a nostalgia to it. They had a strong fan base during that era. Why not bring it back? We're past the society where the letters TNA have some bad connotation to them. We're all adults now. So I think, more than anything else, that's for the fans. And if you're a fan of TNA back then, probably feels good to say like, oh, TNA's back,
Absolutely. I thought it was really cool watching NXT and seeing you show up, making your way into WWE. Just overall, how do you feel about your tenure in the WWE?
I mean, I have 18 months, I think I was there in total.
Yeah.
And I got to do more than I ever would have anticipated, especially in 18 months. I got to do the NXT thing at a time where that brand was really hot. I got to do commentary, which I never had thought about.
That was really cool. I think he was underrated as a commentator. Just throwing that out there.
I really, really enjoyed it. Getting to work with Michael Cole. He was so gracious and helping me, even though I was just kind of a temporary guy in there for a storyline. Getting to work with Morrow, who I love as a person. That whole team, Corey Graves. I mean, all their announcers just so talented, and I don't think people realize how much they have to do, how much traffic's going on in their earpieces, and they're listening and they're doing, and it's not an easy job. And so that was an experience I'll be forever grateful for. And then getting to do some pay-per-views and having my WrestleMania, 70,000 people right down here in Orlando, and my friends and family there, and to accomplish all that in 18 months when I don't think that anybody had any of that earmarked for me when I walked in that company. There was no plans for me when I walked into WWE other than to just be a name guy they could use for NXT. I mean, that was really it, right? Like that was what my role was supposed to be. There was never any talk of me being on the main roster or doing anything of substance. So it's just an opportunity. And as fate would have it, I got my orbital bone shattered in a match with Nakamura, just a freak accident. I mean, he kicks hard. It just, caught me in the right spot. And that led to me to commentary. And on commentary, from what I understand, Vince took a liking to me once he heard I could talk. And he's the one who then, greenlit and changed the WrestleMania match to me and Neville. And, so again, 18 months, it was a whirlwind. I never really caught my breath. And then it was over.
After leaving WWE, you'd go on this crazy reign as the belt collector, collecting championships from all over the place, including Impact. Did you come up with the idea, or was it one of those things that just kind of happened, going to different promotions, winning different titles, and then all of a sudden you got, almost as many belts, if not as many belts as Ultimo Dragon?
I mean, I don't know how many he had. No, man,
like 11 or 12 at once.
I came up with it. I said, I have an idea. I'm going to win all the titles. I mean, it's just it's so ridiculous, right? I know there's people there's probably some people like online who really think that, right? Like I was telling these companies like, well, I'll come and wrestle for you, but I gotta be your champion. It's absurd. It's so absurd. No, it was completely organic, and it wasn't until like the third one where I was like, this is almost a thing, and so it started, I think, with the World Series Wrestling Championship, which was an Australian company, and then whenever you're fresh off WWE TV, your inbox is flooded. Everybody wants you on their show, for that first go around. And so that year I did like 250,000 miles in the air, just flying. I was somewhere every weekend. So then I did something with this UK company, IPW, and they had some other like kind of angle going with this other UK company. And that company had to get the title off one of the guys at the time because that guy was going back to Japan. And so I said, I got this idea of like, you do like an invasion angle. I said, and like, if you guys you guys need someone to put the title on, you put it on me temporarily. We can do this invasion angle, yada, yada. And they liked the idea. I was like, okay, cool. Cause I'm coming back anyway. And so then I had 3 of them, in which, it was whatever. And I don't know which one was next. Maybe it was like the Defy or something. And I was like, oh shit. Now this is like, once you got like 3 or 4, it's almost like, this is kind of like a thing. And then Impact called and said, hey, we want to bring you back. And we have this idea that you win the title on your first night, like in a surprise match. And I'm like, well, geez, if I win that one, like then it's definitely a thing, because that one actually
locked in.
That one has a little bit of substance to it. And, but that's really what it was. It was just all really organic. It was, nothing I would ever think to like even come up with or pitch. I mean, it's just the most absurd thing to pitch to a promoter. Like, yeah, I win all your titles. But I'll be honest, like probably my favorite time of my career, and my favorite matches were all the matches where I lost the title. Like those are by far my favorite matches of my career. Every place that I lost that title, the houses were up and the crowd was hot. Like they wanted to see me lose. And as a good heel, like that's why do I enjoy being the bad guy? Because in real life, unfortunately, more often than not, the bad guys win, right? The bad guys win. Okay. Let's just be honest about it. So in wrestling, I got to be the bad guy and be a really good bad guy and make people so angry at me. And now I've got all these titles and I've come into your territory and I've taken your title and made people so angry that when it was time for me to finally get what I deserved, listening to that crowd and how happy they were that I just got beat. Some of my favorite moments of my career by far.
So like, just out of curiosity, if we're looking at your most recent run, you've popped up in MLW, which I was really excited to see you there. It's really cool to see you really mesh well with the new flavor there at Major League Wrestling. How did you kind of get into the fold there, and what are some of the goals that you have for yourself if any, for MLW?
They just approached me about coming in to do color commentary if I was interested. You know, I took a bit of a break from wrestling in 2020. It was I say the universe conspired to spit me out of the wrestling bubble for the first time in my adult life, and it was really necessary, right? Just for my own personal growth, I had to figure some stuff out and detach from the wrestling for a little bit to do that. So when I started taking shows again, one of the questions I'd ask myself was like, what level do you want to do this at? Right? Because I've got to a really good place in my personal life, weirdly, when wrestling wasn't a part of it, And so I know like there's a lot of parts of pro wrestling I really love, and then there's a lot of parts of this business I really don't love. There's a certain level of toxicity and negativity and the politics and all these things like that. I was unsure if I wanted to open myself back up to that. So I was happy doing random obscure indies that nobody was watching. I go get to have some fun, make a little bit of money, and I was okay with that. So when MLW called, really the question I'd ask myself was, do you want to kind of reemerge in a place that's visible, a little higher up in the rankings of promotions, and but I felt like color commentary was a good, easy way to kind of test that and see how it felt. So I came in and did the first few shows, color commentary, had a lot of fun. I do enjoy doing commentary. Um, and then they just approached me and said, hey, we didn't know if you were still wrestling or were interested, but we got this thing called the Opera Cup. And if you wanted to do a few matches, like, here's kind of what we were thinking. And, I thought about it and I said, well, I probably have just enough time to try to get myself back into somewhat decent ring shape, And then, I did those Opera Cup matches, worked Paul London, Kushida, and then I worked Mystico. And it felt good. I was like in there, I was like, okay, like, I think I still have enough left in me that I can still go out and perform at the level that I expect for myself. I set the bar high for what I go out there and do, and if I couldn't do that, then I'd rather just not do it at all. But those matches told me, like, no, like, if you apply yourself and you take the mentality back on, that you can still do this at a high level. And so, Tom Lawler took my spot in commentary, so it looks like I'm a full-time wrestler now there. And we just had Battle Riot here down in Florida last week. That'll air probably coming up in the next week or so. Then I had a great match with Trevor Lee, who's extremely talented. We tore the house down. And now I'm setting my sights on some championships. I called out Blue Panther. He's got the National Openweight Championship. And that appeals to me because I don't really like weight restrictions. So let's just have an open weight title, and any man, any size, you think you can get the job done. So that's my goal right now. And so my goal for 2026 right now is to be a pillar for Major League Wrestling that they can build around, as they're, really starting to build, I think, some cool things there. They've got a lot of great talent. Their production value has really stepped up. I hear some rumblings of some type of TV deal in the works. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like. Continue the relationship with CMLL. I'd like to go back down there. Had a great time, like my first experience down there. And just really, again, I'm enjoying the process again. I'm physically getting myself back to where I want to be. And again, all of us, just like, talk about AJ Styles, there's going to come a point where the door is going to close, or we're going to decide to close the door. I'm not there yet, and I still got a lot left in me. And so I'm excited for this year to be a bit of a resurgence, and kind of remind some people exactly what, Austin Aries, the pro wrestler, can do in that ring.
Definitely. I know we'll be watching, and I'm excited to see what that looks like. I got one more question for you, and then I'm gonna let you go.
All right.
When we first started talks about getting you on here, you did mention that you was gonna do a loop in Canada with CWE,
Yeah.
uh, and a big part of that, loop for you was working with against alongside Kamikaze, who I've had on the
Yep.
podcast. Great guy.
Yep.
Uh, what's it like? What was it like for you going through that loop through Canada, and what was your experience like working with a competitor like Kamikaze?
Yeah. For Kamikaze is awesome. That
I
guy's
love him.
great. Um, just like a good dude. And then just, in the ring, he just really gets it. And, just a positive asset to any show he's on. And a guy who's showing that you can, like, this guy's doing the grind and the hustle, and it's like what he does for a living, which is awesome. There's guys out there that if you know how to merchandise, and you have a good character, like you don't have to be on TV to be able to do this to pay your bills. I love the CWE guys. I've known Danny for a long time. They've got a great crew. They're fun shows. The worst part about it's usually the travel, depending on the weather. I'm going back here for them in March for 11 show tour. That's going to be the Rage in the Cage tour. So every main event will be in the cage. Don't know how many times I'll be in that cage. I'm sure at least a few. Yeah, I love that. I'd love to be able to do that. At least once a year for those guys, if not more. It's kind of fun to have that old school camaraderie where we're all hitting the road together. We're all setting the ring up. We're all tearing it down. Like we are the show. Like we're the circus rolling into town. We set it up. We put the show on. We tear it down, and we're off to the next town. And that's just a lot of fun. And again, it was a big test for me. At 47 years old, like, can I wrestle 22 shows in 22 days? And the answer was yes. And still had a little left to give. So yeah, it's a great time.
I think the latter end of 2025 showed us that in 2026 and going forward, we got a lot more Austin Aries to prepare for, and I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for making episode 200 special. I
Sure.
hope you had a good time. And with
Yeah.
that said, the door's wide open. If you ever want to do another one of these, do a little catch up, maybe dive deeper into some of the history with Ring of Honor, TNA, things like that, I'd love to do it.
Let's do it, man. Maybe we'll do like 250 or something, Who knows?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
With that said, I'll just leave this at Austin Aries. We will see you next time, my friend.
Peace.
Perfect.